Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good morning, friends. Before we dive into episode 265, I want to correct a couple things I said on Monday's episode on 264, or at least add more clarity to them. So there's a lot of buzz, and we heard a lot of feedback from episode 264, particularly the section where I gave you guidance as to know when to submit or not submit test scores. And I want to offer this important corrective to what I said on 264. For those of you who don't know, you might want to go back and listen to 264, but I talked about using College Navigator and iPad's data there. So I said in episode 264 that that's 2021 data, followed 2021 data. So here's my corrective. I want that to be your backup approach. Your first approach, your primary approach should be to see if you can get 2022 data, class of 2022 high school, class of 2026 college. And so there's two approaches I want to advocate for you using, and many times this doesn't work, and when it doesn't work, then you go back to what I recommended on Monday's episode as the fallback position. So approach number one, you just come right out and ask the school, when should I submit scores? Some schools are being very great, being very forthright at sharing that. Some schools are putting that on their website. Others are not. I was on a webinar with 5 leading schools this week, and I posed this question. It was a counselor webinar, and I said, will you tell my students when they should or should not submit scores? I said, people are finding this to be very confusing. Will you give them guidance? And the response that I got was, everybody has to make that decision themselves, whether they feel like their scores are a good reflection of their, of their accomplishments academically. And if they feel comfortable, they got that mumbo jumbo, blasé, evasive talk. If you're getting that, then that's not going to work. Second option, some schools are putting it on their website. Not necessarily should you submit or not submit. They're putting their 2022 class profile on their website. And so you should check to see, is the class profile on the website? If it is, go with the 2022. It's a year. It's the most current year. It's the most recent. It's on the website. So I want to correct what I said before in terms of, I always felt this way, just didn't explain it very well. Your primary approach should be, can I get 2022 data? And those are the two ways to try to get it. And if you fail, because a lot of schools are not putting test scores in their class profiles anymore. I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but the thinking is, we keep telling you test scores are not that important, so we're not going to list them. I was just looking at Yale's class profile. They've got a very nice detailed 3-pager, nothing in there about test scores. So if you find the profile and the profile doesn't have middle 50%, then once again, that's not going to work. And then and only then would you go to using the method I taught you on Monday. So I just want to make it clear that's a backup approach. Will oftentimes be a primary approach because a lot of times you won't have success. But try first asking and try first to see if you can find the class profile 2022, most recent year on the website. Look for the middle 50%. Okay. The other thing I want to correct, I've been thinking long and hard about the section on Monday's podcast where I said, if you only have 3 resources to explain how the sausage is made, what should they be? I talked about it, got 150 recommended resources. It's a lot to wade through. What are they? And I realized right afterward, oh snap, I kind of forgot a really important one. And that is The Price You Pay for College. This is Ron Lieber's book and subtitled An Entirely New Roadmap for the Biggest Financial Decision Your Family Will Ever Make. Now, I do not necessarily believe this is the best overall, most comprehensive book when it comes to paying for college. I believe the most comprehensive Paying for College book out there is the Princeton Review, Paying for College 2023. Everything you need to maximize financial aid and afford college. It comes out every single year. But the reason why I go with Lieber's book is because of the way he breaks it down for the average person is just going to be much more digestible. And the way he takes financial issues and he applies them to everyday life. I actually think this has to be in the top 3 books for understanding how the financial part of the sausage is made. Now, if you're either a full pay family or if you're not curious about the whole money piece and how it works, then maybe this book wouldn't be as important to you. But for those for whom money is either going to be important in your financial decision or you just really are curious about how this whole money piece works, I really have to say my top 3 books. I'm sticking with Who Gets In and Why by Salingo. I'm sticking with Rebecca Sabke's Valedictorians at the Gate. And the third book would have to be The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. Those are 3 books I believe all of our regular listeners should have and should read. I personally like all of them better as audiobooks. I don't know if that means they're better as audiobooks or if that means I'm an auditory learner, but I've read them all and I've listened to them all, both. And I personally like the listening too. So that would be my recommendation. So anyway, I just wanted to add 2 correctives to Monday's episode. And now we'll transition to today. This week in the news, record number of first-year students withdraw from the University of Portland, contributing to a $13.4 million shortfall. Ouch. And this is an article that appeared in the Oregonian, and it's written by Sami Edge. Lisa and I will continue to answer questions that students and parents have sent in, and it'll be the final part of my interview with Jon Boeckenstedt. We'll continue talking about higher ed data stories, but we'll also delve into just a wide range of admission topics. Vince, what's going on, man?
Not much. Busy time, as you know. You just returned from NACAC. It was great to hear how everyone's doing. I can't wait. I think next year it's in Los Angeles.
I thought it was in Baltimore.
Oh.
Yeah, because everybody was like seeing Baltimore at the conference.
Oh, wow. That's the last time I went to NACAC. It was in Baltimore. That's how long it's been.
Get you back, man.
All right. Well, I can go back.
Well, I'm looking forward to coming your way, man. December
yes,
4th through 12th. I'll be in greater LA for a 9-school visit.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have you for brunch and Sylvia too.
I'm excited. Good stuff. Good to see Sylvia there. Got to meet her for the first time in person. So it's all good. So we'll look forward to it. So we have a lot to talk about today, and I'm actually really excited because Vince is going to do our recommended resource. So the first time we're having him do that, and I'm staying on Vince. Vince, you did such a great job, by the way, with that interview with Cal Lutheran. You got me really fired up about Cal Lutheran, and I've been putting it on lists. I have.
That's great.
I felt you gave you and Matt as well, gave such a clear picture. So listeners, I've been saying, Vince, I need more interviews out of you. You got a good Rolodex of contacts, man.
Yes, I'll be hitting it soon after November 1st, though.
I know. November 1st is it's just insanely intense.
Yes.
It feels like the new January 1, It's just like the deadline now.
Yes.
It's up.
Yes.
Just feels that way. And it starts, when did it start really picking up for you, would you say?
I would say August is when they really, once the Common App comes out, and then there's that group of students and families that want everything or a lot of it done before school starts.
Yep.
And then after, today's a Jewish holiday, so Happy New Year. We spend a lot of time now. I can see students, my seniors, ready. We've already started submitting, but there's going to be a lot happening in the next 3 weeks.
I hear you. Well, I'll tell you what, for admissions tip today, I'm going to share a tip that Vince and I were actually talking about before we got on. Vince and I did the Julia and the Susan, which means that we, like baseball players, we have a 30 to 45 minute warm up. We talk admissions stuff before we hit record. So we got in the groove. But Vince and I were just talking about how students can make a mistake by just sharing too much about their struggles in their personal statement. I was telling a student the other day, because he started out with every imaginable failure, difficulty, setback. And I said, it's almost like a bank. You're starting out making all these withdrawals. So you got to come with a whole lot of deposits into your account, because I don't think sometimes students understand that the personal statement, you want to be transparent. And when you're transparent and you're authentic, it can be very powerful. It can be very brave if you have a deft touch. But you don't want to scare people away.
Yes.
You don't want to, and I literally had this conversation before we jumped on with another student, Vince. I said, I think you need to rework your personal statement, because you're scaring me that you're not going to be able to do the academic program. You're going so much into all your struggles. And whether it's the emotional scare, and, I feel for kids because, they hear be transparent, be authentic. But man, then they just spill all their guts about every eating disorder they've had and all those things. And then, Vince and I were talking about how eating disorders can freak schools out because they can spread, they can get contagious. A lot of times they're not always, almost like alcoholism in some ways, like people may think they're over them, but they can come back. And schools can get concerned that, are we going to have a potential suicide on our hands? I mean, was it going to spread? And I'm not saying never, ever address it. I wouldn't go that far, but I sure would say tread lightly. And most of the time when I see people address it, I talked to another student earlier this year. I said, I don't want you talking about that. I think you're going to scare schools away. So, Vince, any thoughts on that? I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, I think that students really have to have that conversation in the right context. And sometimes the therapy room is a great place to have that conversation and to work out those details. I think it would also behoove the student to, if they're going to travel down that road, to have a conversation with their trusted people. So their counselor at school, the counselor, if you're working with an independent counselor, to have that conversation, and then have a conversation with your parents, because I think there's an appropriate context. And if you haven't had enough time away from it, yesterday I was working with a student, and they were writing a gratitude letter, and the number of times they used the word anxious, stressed, fearful, I highlighted them, and they realized that what they were communicating behind this thank you note was that they were stressed out, they were anxious, and that person might enroll if they were admitted. And I said, is that what you want to communicate in your thank you, that you're always anxious, nervous, and stressed out? And they were like, no, that's not who I am. And I said, well, when you've mentioned it 15 times in 200 words, that's the message that you're sending. And they didn't even realize it until they saw that. So I have had students talk about tough issues in the past, but that's a conversation that really has to be well vetted. And I also tell students that if it's something still in process, if you haven't resolved it, you're still working through it, it can be really difficult to create that essay, to develop that essay, because there's no ending yet.
That's a really important point. And for those of you interested more in this, my interview with Christina Lopez, the Dean of Admission at Barnard, she, I thought, had such a deft touch, because, the interview was really about, should you disclose your mental health issues in your essay? And she's been really transparent about her own challenges. But she said right in there, we are not your therapist. And you should not feel obligated to tell us everything. She also said, if you say something that raises too much of a flag, that will be factored in, because we have to assess the risk reward. And, Vince, we'll have these really long answers in terms of the purpose of the personal statement, and we can go into that, and we can talk, and we can answer, each of us can answer that question for 10 minutes. I've been being a lot more succinct with my students lately. I'll say, they do want to take a look at your basic writing, are you mechanically sound and all that, but that's pass-fail, and a lot of schools, it's expected that will be sound. But the bottom line is schools are trying to assess what are you bringing to our community to make us stronger.
Yes.
And that's really the essay, right? It's replacing that interview for most schools. Most schools don't have an interview. And that could be personal qualities, that could be talents, that could be interests, that could be perspectives. What are you bringing to make us stronger? And so if you have too many deficits in your essay, if you talk too much about all the things you didn't do well, you're not going to get me excited about what you're going to bring to our community.
Yes.
And somewhere there's wrong messaging out there, because I see a lot of that in the essay room. But on the other hand, I feel bad for kids, because just getting that nuance right is important. I see another kid, I'm sure you do as well, that they're touting all their extracurricular accomplishments in the personal statement. They're not letting the activities in the honors section speak. And they're almost like screaming, look at me, I had impact. Yeah. That's not the purpose of it either.
Right.
So It's not your braggadocious place, but it's not your place to just do your big dump. And so many of them start out with, you know what it is? I think people think that they need to have some powerful turnaround story, and that causes them to just languish too long in when they were like mired in clay and they were struggling.
Yes.
And like, listen, schools love to see you overcame things. They love to know you're resilient. They love to know you have grit. They love to know you can take a punch and get up. But just remember, students, if you're listening, like, your personal statement should get a school excited about what you bring to their community. It's what I say all the time. Every college is tuned into radio station WIIFM. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? What is Vince going to do to come in and make our community stronger compared to Vincent, who I just read before him, and what are the contributions? And the thing that's going to get someone enthusiastic is going to be, some of that is that likability, that bonding, that connection. It can just be personal qualities. It doesn't have to be that you accomplish something great. You can have unbelievable personal qualities that we're looking for, but it's your strengths that are going to get me more excited than if you're too stuck in the mud. And so yeah. I know it took a while on it, but I'm just seeing a lot of this in the essay writing, and we're in that phase where that's a lot of what we're doing right now with kids.
Yeah.
Is working with them and trying to take their essays from a 2 or 3 to an 8, 9 to 10 if we can. And I don't know, any other comments?
No, I just think definitely check out what your message is and be clear. We always set out before, what do we want to share with colleges? And if that's a message that you need to share, just make sure that you include important people that can help you navigate that well.
Good word. All right. So our missions vernacular, I've heard, this is the first time I've heard this term, although it's a growing movement I'm seeing everywhere. And the term is flipped admissions. I hadn't heard it until 2 weeks ago when EAB took me out to a nice dinner to talk about their flipped admissions. So this is where students go on, they complete a portal.
Okay.
And then colleges go to the portal and just start admitting kids off the portal. So it's like reversing it, flipping the order. And this is growing. Some people call it direct admissions. But this started, like, College Greenlight's done great work with this in Chicago. And I've been actively involved with EAB that bought out Greenlight because they're bringing it to Atlanta. So I've helped them bring it to Atlanta. It's a big project I've been working on with them for the last 6 months. Very exciting. The pilot went extremely well. And I'm seeing other people do this, direct admissions. Is the most common term for it. But for the first time, I heard someone call it flipped admissions. And then I was at NACAC, and Angel Perez said he wouldn't be surprised if 10 years from now, this is the predominant way admissions is done, where students go on and they complete a portal, complete information, and colleges go in and make offers or not. That surprised me. Maybe 20 years, maybe never. But it is definitely a growing trend, and flipped admissions. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing any of that in your market at all, Vince?
No, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. So they go in to whatever university and they have their own portal to apply.
No, so let me take a step back. So not a university, but a neutral player creates a portal.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, College Greenlight, which is was an offshoot of CapEx, but now is run by EAB, so deep pockets now. So they have students go on, and it's kind of a combination of like a questionnaire that you and I might use when we were first working with a new family to get that kind of information. Writing sample, the official transcript will be there. They can be structured differently. The ones that Greenlight and EAB is doing, no recommendations are there, but college counselors have to basically stand behind a kid that they put up there. Like I'm a college counselor. Like I'm recommending these 10 kids from my school. So you put like your verbal imprimatur on there, and they will let certain schools come behind and say, look, I need a little bit more information. Some of your more selectives that are involved and say, look, I'm going to need a little more. So they'll work on the side. If a school says I'm going to need a rec or I'm going to need a writing sample or something a little more. But the idea is once a student has filled all that information out, then they go recruit a bunch of colleges to be part of it. And they log in, they can read the profiles and read everything, and then they just make offers.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, they make offers with money. So from a student standpoint, like it's kind of appealing to do this because I do the work once. There's no app fees ever. There's no denial letters ever because you're only picking people you admit, so nobody's ever getting rejected. Like a school goes in and picks the ones that they want and says, I like this kid, and I'm going to make them an offer.
Wow.
And so they're reversing the process. And it's spreading. Like one of the sessions I was at talked about, like for Angel Perez to say 10 years from now, he wouldn't be surprised if this is the predominant way admissions is done, speaks to its growth. And so Common App is exploring with doing some stuff direct admission. I'm seeing it pop up all over the place. But for the first time, I heard the term used flipped admissions to describe reversing the roles. Does it make sense now? Or I don't know if I explained it well.
It does. It does. I also saw, and I don't know if this is a part of it, but within the college planning software SCORE, they have their own application. So
yeah, that's a big deal.
It's called SCORE, and then you fill out things. It looks like the Common App. That I haven't had any student want to do it, but I want to explore it more and understand it more. I don't know.
I had meetings with SCORE on this and with Coalition, both of them. Now, this was not at NACAC. The week before, I went to the NCAN conference. So they all have their booths out. You know how they have their booth. And I talked to them at length. And I've been meaning to talk about this more in the podcast, but secret is out. SCORE, Coalition, Technolution, Slate, the parent company.
Yeah.
They're taking on Common App. This is not a joke. Oh, yeah, because they're like, we're going to have everything from the kid already working with their school. Why not just make an application? Because do you notice that Coalition's application went away? They basically have just adopted the SCORE platform as their new application.
Yes.
But I heard an interview a couple years ago on a podcast I like. It's called Crush. It's a college admissions podcast. It just doesn't have very many episodes. So if it was regular podcast, it'd be every bit as good as ours, if not more. It's very good. And I heard an interview on Crush podcast a couple years ago with the founder of Slate, Technolutions. And that wonder whiz kid who's like doing computer science at age like 7 and 8 is kind of something else. But in that interview, I'm trying to remember the name of the guy, Sweeney. Gavin Sweeney, I think is his name. He used to be in Rochester admissions. And he asked Alexander Clark, founder of Slate. He said, with all this incredible technology you have, why don't you take Common App on? You have everything. You can take the Common App on. Well, guess what? They're doing it now. So stay tuned. We'll come back to that. All right, our big number is 317,000, and that is how many Chinese students are currently attending U.S. colleges. That's a big number. Just to put that in perspective, it's pretty much double the second country, India, 167,000, which is more than 4 times the third country, South Korea, And if I look at it compared to Canada, which is fourth, there's 13 times more Chinese students than Canadian students. So top countries, China, India, South Korea, Canada. But China, 317,000, and that is as of 2021.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
All right. So our article today is interesting. I wanted to pick this article up and discuss it because you can see how hard it is for some schools to make it, to survive. And it's a story about the University of Portland, and now they have a $13.4 million shortfall financially. And the interesting thing is they thought they had a record year. They had a record year of first number of students who had signaled their intent to start in the fall. So everybody was exciting after 2 years of small classes during the pandemic, but then students started canceling their deposits. They went from 1,100 students down to 860 students, one of their smallest classes in a decade. And the record number of withdrawals caused them to miss their budget and leave the $8.9 million behind where they thought they were going to be financially. And as a result of that, the schools had to change its retirement plan. They've had to freeze faculty hirings and administrators and figure out what they're going to do. And when they looked a little deeper, they found out that there's several reasons why students purported that they were doing this. Some of it was just the cost of college, because they average $35,535 in terms of what people actually pay after grants and scholarships, compared to $18,556 for Oregon and $20,318 for Oregon State. And there was a series of things. People complained about student fatigue because of COVID, mental health challenges, increased competition among schools, and competition from other private schools who were doing more tuition discounting. And just to show how the financials hit them, so they lost $2.3 million in first-year enrollment revenue. They lost a total of $3.9 million from all students not living in the dorms. They also found their retention dropped. That's the number of people who returned, from 90 to 86%. That cost the school another $1 million. Their summer tuition was down from $6 million to $4.6 million. And then they end up having to offer more scholarships than anticipated, or they would have even had more carnage. And so they had budgeted for a $4.5 million deficit as they started seeing this happen. But by the time you added all of the different losses, it was $13.4 million deficit, 8.9 more than they were expecting. And so some of the things they had to do, they had to take retirement and take it from 11% contribution down to 5%.
Wow.
And then they had to, there were 80 staff spots and 13 faculty spots that were empty, that hadn't been filled, and they had to freeze it and say, we can't hire, and leave them empty again. And so I wanted to talk about this just to get a sense of how difficult it is out here for a lot of schools that may be very good schools, but maybe they're not known for one thing that really sets them apart. And if they're private school and they're charging more money and they're underfunded, it's just very, very difficult. So you're seeing a lot more closures, more mergers, more downsizing, and more just having to get really, really lean on staff and hiring adjuncts instead of full professors and things like that. So Vince, you've read the article. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's really surprising because University of Portland location, it's in the center of Portland. It's a great area. It's the major concert venue for the city of Portland. So I have always recommended students look at the University of Portland. In my mind, it was very similar to LMU, Loyola Marymount, here in Los Angeles.
Sure.
It was also similar in some ways to Santa Clara. The things that it didn't have, LMU has Silicon Beach, so a lot of tech and entertainment opportunities at LMU. And then Santa Clara is right in the middle of Silicon Valley. So the University of Portland isn't in the middle of a tech center, but I still found it surprising because it's such an appealing place, and the students that I've had who've gone there have really liked it. I think in terms of an enrollment management crisis, this would be near the top. So as you think you've enrolled a great class,
I know,
and 25% of it melts away, and you don't even know that they're melting away, there is very little that you can do, and then you have to really kick in gear to make sure that who's coming actually shows up on that day. Because I'm sure some of this hit them as that first week of school started, and they just saw, probably they thought maybe it was going to be high, 15%, 20%, but then when it climbed to nearly 25%, it would really cause a campus to put a major pause on growth, on programming, and resources for students. But I would say for the student looking to go to school in Portland, I still think that University of Portland is a good value, but there are going to be some tough years.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about this because I think sometimes we talk so much about these schools and how selective they are. This is where the majority of higher ed is really struggling right now. I mean, students are down 1.3 million from the previous year. One of the sessions I went to at NACAC I really found valuable, Vince, was it was 5 or 6 schools that were talking about all the creative things they have to do to recruit, because basically we don't have brand name and we don't have deep pockets, and there's so much competition around. And when you listen to these schools, I mean, you just realize they're pinching pennies. One of them was talking about how, when one of your students does something really great and they make a great contribution on TikTok or something, give them a gift card, get them a gift card, get them a $5 gift card. And I'm like, $5?
Wow.
And I went to another really good session that talked about the growth of regionals all around the country, and it gave all kinds of data, and it was broken down by West and Midwest and South and East. For those who don't know, Vince, tell our listeners what regionals do. It may not be a term that people are that familiar with.
So regional universities tend to draw a majority of their...
Well, I'm talking about regional admission officers.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
admissions officer.
Sorry, yeah.
So they're the person in charge of a particular territory. It's usually several states and regions within the state that they're located. So it was so funny, when I worked on the admission side, I always had the same territory the whole time.
But you were different because you traveled.
Yes.
So I'm talking about the regional that, like, Houston says we're going to plant somebody in L.A., and they're going to live in L.A. They're not going to live in Houston. They're going to live there and just work that market. They're going to hit all the schools up and do all the fairs. They're going to do all, they're going to serve that market, and they're not going to live in the home base only. And so there's been tremendous growth there because, I mean, it can be really effective, right? Like, plant someone in Chicago if you're getting $35,000 per student. I mean, pay them a certain amount of salary, benefits, this, that, the other. And if they enroll 10 students, if you're getting $35,000 a student, they brought $35,000 of revenue and some Midwest diversity into your community. But, when I attended this session, I mean, they're struggling. They're complaining. People with 16 years experience, the highest pay in any region of the country was the median was $68,000. These are people with 60, so, these schools are struggling out here, and they're saying all the things that they have to do and how many high school nights they go to and how many interviews they do and how many apps they read and all that, just serving that local market because they're trying to drum up applications. And then a lot of the public schools are doing this now because you can get triple the tuition. If you can get someone to pay, 35 out of state as opposed to 10, 12, 14 in state, these are the kinds of things schools are having to do because of the financially they're just struggling. And then so many people were talking about the burnout and the turnover because they're churning them like just crazy. I mean, a different rep every year, partly overworked, but also underpaid.
Really
how
underpaid.
Many people? Yeah, really underpaid.
I remember when I was thinking about a job change, I looked at regional because I thought, that what a great gig, and
sure,
you just talk about a university, and so I had a opportunity with Albany, and I think I think the salary for the year and like 40 college fare. I don't even remember. It was immense. They wanted somebody in LA.
Sure.
I think it was $35,000.
In LA, like you'll be lucky if you can pay your rent with that. Good luck eating and transportation and everything else.
Right? How was I going to get there? I thought to myself, these college fares. I was going to, use my feet, rollerblade over there. I don't know.
Well, I think there's just a crisis right now in higher ed because, first of all, people are questioning, is it worth it at a different rate than ever before?
Mm-hmm.
States are cutting back and the federal government's cutting back, making appropriations. So cost keeps getting passed on. The more cost gets passed on, the more people demand more. And then people are demanding more. Like you and I know this, Vince. Like I'm sure when you went to college back in the day, it was corridor style or traditional style housing in the dorms. People don't want that anymore. They want suite style or apartment style. And they expect food to be a certain thing, and they expect your study abroad, and they expect career services and the internship to be humming, and academic supports and mental health support. I mean, all this stuff they expect. Student centers, athletics, to to have great facilities and to be winning teams. They got to pay coach. I mean, all this stuff is money, 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 and then you're left, and then people are like, and I don't know. I just think that there is a bit of a crisis right now financially between what people are demanding, but what they demand, what the price point would actually be to deliver that. And, people are always willing to pay for the biggest brand names, but if you don't have the biggest brand names, it's just tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because some of those places you mentioned, because of the growth in what they have to spend on keeping students there and interested and helping them with the many things that they're interested in, I've also seen schools really, they put 4 students in a room built for 2, and they're all paying the same housing rate.
Sure.
And University of San Diego, I remember when we were on the tour, they kind of steered us away from a certain part of the campus, but we wanted to see the room, and so we knocked on the door, and there's 4 boys opened the door, and I just thought, this is a room for 2 people, not 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
And recently I had a good friend whose daughter went to Brown, and they're paying $82,000.
Sure.
And they were in a room clearly built for 1 person.
Wow.
3 people.
Well, I love the price for San Diego State for out of state compared to like UCSD or like huge difference.
Yes.
But man, do they hit you on the housing? The last time I checked, it's like $21,000.
It's beautiful though. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it better be at $21,000 for room and board.
Well, it's pretty close to their 4-year graduation rate, which is 29%. So they need to step up there too.
So, what should our takeaways be on this article, Vince?
I think for the listener,
mm-hmm.
there's going to be an opportunity if you want to stay in the Northwest. I think the University of Portland will offer some strong merit scholarships. I still think it's a strong value if you're interested in nursing. If you're looking for a diverse campus that reflects at a private university that reflects strong values, is in the center. It's a great part of Portland. Then I think there's going to be some opportunities in terms of merit aid to make sure that they hit their numbers exceedingly well for the next 10 years.
No, I agree. And I'm glad you finished because, there's a lot to like about this school. And I'm glad you highlighted the nursing program, which is one of their crown jewels, as well. But I also would say to families that be aware of the financial resources of a school, too. And there's lots of ways you can do it. We've done podcasts on the past. Hechinger Report's got a fantastic tool. We've got some, if you go under our links under resources, ways of checking the schools. You can look at the bond ratings as well that they have. And another thing to do is watch enrollment trends because that's oftentimes an indicator. Most schools are tuition driven. And if enrollment trends are going down, that's oftentimes a sign that there might be some, I would be asking tough questions to schools if you're seeing enrollment trends going down. And if you look at some of the indicators of who's financially healthy and who's not, and you see some concerning things. As an admission person, I feel for Portland because you too, that would be terrible to be in the summer, think you have this class and then watch them melt away. And then you have to throw even more scholarship money to keep ones. And let's face it, we're still kind of coming off a pandemic. So some of these things are still pandemic related. Pandemic doesn't just affect students. You can have a dad at home that they're struggling and the kid decides, hey, let me go back and help them, And so there's a lot of dynamics going on here. And I really appreciate your perspective, Vince. The intention was not to throw, UP under the bus here because we know it's a very good school. But that's part of the point, that even very good schools can have things like this happen if they're not careful.
Yes. Good point. Good point.
I'd talk more to Vince, but he's got to jump in a counseling session. So I'm going to let you go. Vince, send me that link. I love it. We'll get it in our recommended resource, and we'll see you back next month, my friend.
All right.
I think I'll be at College Board between now and then, so I'll give you an update how that one goes.
Can't wait. And look forward to seeing you in December.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it too. I'm in to visit 9 schools, all in Vince's area. And so Vincent has already graciously agreed to have me over for breakfast, and we're looking forward to it. So thanks, my friend, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Take care.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
So, Lisa, we have so much to talk about today. No will surprise you from admission officer this time. We're just going to dive in. I know you like that series. We'll come back with more. I have to have brainwaves, epiphanies.
I know. Yeah. You have to just,
can't pull them out of thin air.
No, the brilliance just has to happen. It has its own process.
There you go. Awesome. So this is bonus content, which I do every 10 weeks. Lisa does every 10. We alternate. And, why don't you introduce the subject today?
Sure. So today, Mark is going to do his best to explain why a college will come into your high school and admit kids with lower grades and test scores over kids with higher grades and test scores.
This is something I want to talk about a lot because, you'll talk to a student and they'll say, it's messed up. This kid is ranked 3rd in their class. They're like a 1530 and like a 3.97 unweighted. And the college took this other kid that was like ranked 18th with like a 379 and like a 1310, like what in the world is going on? And so people have a tendency, and I say people, I'm talking students, and I would say parents as well, to think that you can sort of create a pecking order of desirability just off of test scores and grade point average. And in reality, that for schools that just are admitting by the numbers, that can work. But for schools that are holistic, there's so many reasons why this occurs. There's so many reasons why a student that might have lower grades and lower testing would be more desirable to a college over a student with higher grades and higher testing. And so I just want to kind of explore a lot of those different reasons, and hopefully this will be helpful. So the first is something that you've heard us, hopefully if you've been a regular listener, you've probably heard us talk about a lot, and that's institutional priorities, right? And a way to think about institutional priorities is just that, every college has certain needs that they need to have fulfilled to be the college that they want to be. And if you are somebody that can meet one of those priorities, then you are going to be prioritized. And there's different types of priorities. Like there's program priorities. Like I'll give an example. So one of the trends I'm starting to notice a lot, Lisa, is a lot of the liberal arts and science schools, in response to the fact that the public hears liberal arts a lot of times and they think Starbucks, or I don't know if I'm going to get a good job. And so what a lot of liberal arts and science schools are doing now is they're adding professional programs. So you're seeing them. We now have business BA degrees. We now have nursing.
Right.
We now have engineering. You've seen that, right?
Yeah, Elon does that. They keep adding nursing, PT, engineering, all that stuff.
Yeah, because they're reading the market. And when they not launch these new programs, guess what? It becomes a priority to have students interested in these programs. Mm-hmm. So then that could be an institutional priority. In fact, almost any time a school launches a new program We've added dance, we've added data science. Now it becomes a priority to get students in there. So that's an example of like a programmatic institutional priority. But then you also have demographic institutional priorities. So pretty much every school that does holistic admissions is going to believe that the college is a learning laboratory, and the more different people that you can meet and interact with, that's what's going to sharpen your critical thinking skills, your understanding of the world, broaden your worldview, challenge your preconceived notions. So that's going to be a priority for schools, for most schools. And we're talking about a lot of things. It can be gender, it can be race, it can be social class, it can be socioeconomics, it can be culture. All of that stuff can fit into there. And for some schools, it can get really specific. For example, and this came up a lot when I was at the NACAC conference. A lot of times students will talk about in highly selective pools, they'll say Asian American students are overrepresented, and they'll just sort of paint one felt stroke of the brush. Well, I went to a workshop that looked at how underrepresented Cambodian kids are, and how Cambodian kids, like, they mirror much more like Black Americans from so many standpoints, like the income, the percentage that are first gen, all of that. And for schools that are really doing really holistic admissions, they're not just looking just at the word Asian, but they'll look within the Asian population and say, do we have kids from Hmong? Do we have kids, what's our Taiwanese population like? What's our Vietnamese population like? What's our Cambodian population? And so the idea is like having every voice around the table for that learning laboratory. And so that can be an institutional priority. Then you can have institutional priorities related to like finance and marketing, meaning like we need more full pay families, meaning more people that can pay. Or, marketing could be anything from building your sports program up to celebrity kit. I mean, there's all kinds of things. You could make it a priority. We want to serve our faculty really well, and we want to retain them. And so we're going to put together a really nice tuition remission program, for our faculty, and it's going to be a priority within our applicant pool to retain our faculty. I've been going back again and listening to Salingo's book, Who Gets Into Why, on tape, and because every time I listen, I pick something up. And I was just listening when I was on my trip to Houston, talking about a particular student whose rating was nowhere near as strong as the other student's rating, and ended up getting in. This was at Emory. Over other kids with much higher ratings. And one of the reasons is because, and I've seen this being here in Atlanta, Emory has a pretty generous policy, not just for faculty, but for people that work at the university, for their kids. And that happened to be one of the people. Like, they checked a few boxes. In that case, they were both an alumni, which could be another priority. We want to serve our alum. Obviously, that's becoming controversial. But it could be administrators, or it could be other employees. And so those are different types. So there's like financial institutional priorities, marketing, student body composition, and then programs. So that's one. I feel we've talked about that a fair amount before. There's one I really want to talk about, and this is huge. And this is, to be honest, this is the biggest reason I really want to talk on this topic, even that hopefully what I just said there was helpful as well. Once again, I'm borrowing, Lisa. I'm stealing today.
All right.
I don't remember who came up with this. I kind of want to say it was Tufts was the first place I heard it. For some reason, I think Tufts was the one. I'm giving Tufts credit. So the way some colleges approach looking at an application, and I personally like this, they have two big categories, and they call it data and voice. So data is all your statistical stuff, right? So that's everything from your grades, the courses that you took, your grade trends, SAT, ACT, AP, all that stuff, right? That's all kind of in that rank. That's all in that data category. So I'll ask you a question, Lisa. What do you think would be in the voice category?
I think that would be like your personal qualities, maybe your essay, or, things about your activities that are interesting, in your letters of recommendation, finding out what kind of person you are, what kind of student you are, that kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned almost all of it. So it is personal qualities for sure. It's what's in your essays, your student voice, right? It's personality. It's recommendations, absolutely recommendations. It's interviews. It's all of those things. And in schools that do holistic admissions, those things are powerful. I mean, you know this, Lisa, when I get a student essay that really excites me, I send it over to you to read, and I send it to Linda, and I usually have Susan read it, and we all talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And those things get me fired up. And likewise for you guys as well. You get a great essay, you get really, really excited about a student and what they're going to bring. And that's that voice piece. And that voice piece, it really, really, really resonates. It really carries weight. And when I draw off my own admissions experience, the people that you get the most excited about are not people that necessarily have high numbers, because numbers are kind of dry. What gets you super excited as an admission officer are certain things, and I'm going to mention 4 or 5. One is people that are interesting and unique. That can get you really excited. Another is people that are just incredibly likable. I know you don't like this. I remember before, likable, that's so subjective. Remember we had this conversation. Mm-hmm. But it's just true. If you feel like, oh my goodness, our faculty are going to love this kid. Oh my goodness, people in the dorm are going to love this kid. Those personal qualities, And then other personal qualities too, like leadership, people that are adventuresome, people that are glue kids that bring people together. Another huge category that gets you excited is, I'll call it impact and perceived impact. So you look at the impact that somebody's having in their own community, maybe their own school or maybe their broader community. And that could be anything from, it could be, I remember a student I worked with some years ago, and she started an organization called Girl Power. She started in 7th grade. And then she continued to stick with it and mentored it all the way through 12th grade. The thing blew up, it exploded, it went all over. It was like having teenage girls having positive body image, positive self-esteem, that kind of stuff. And she did all kinds of things to do it. And she ended up getting a full cost of attendance leadership scholarship to college.
Wow.
Yeah, at a school that's around, one of those close to $80,000 type schools. So that kind of stuff, right? Impact, because at the end of the day, you work in admissions because you love kids and you love your institution. And so anytime you can see something that can advance a kid and advance your institution, it's going to get you excited. So when you see that perceived impact, wow. And I say perceived impact because you can look at what they've done. There's no guarantee they'll translate, but you usually can have a high degree of confidence. If they've been a mover and shaker in their environment, wherever they've been, then, you're going to most likely think, you're going to come in here and crush it.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the things, when you're around the admissions committee, these are the things that really make you advocate for a kid. They're interesting. They're unique. Look at their impact. And I just think that our community is gonna love this kid. Different kinds of people. They can bring kids together, try different things. So I just want to stop for a second. I have more to say, but what are your thoughts on this whole concept of data voice and how much people underestimate this voice piece?
Well, I think that's true. I mean, you have to have the data to express your voice. I think without that, you're not going to get looked at. But, it is true. And I do think, you and I were talking about a student just a few minutes ago that, has had some academic struggles, but wrote about that in a really compelling way and is kind of cleaning up on the admissions front already. And I think it's because her voice comes through really well as a very determined person who's overcome some adversity. So, it's just, I think that there's just a lot about that's subjective, that, it's unpredictable. But that's why it's good to be authentic and be your real self.
Well, here's an example, and I agree with everything you just said there, Lisa, but here's an example that might help people to think about this. So let's say you have a company that you run, own, or manage. You manage an office, let's say. You don't have to be the owner, you can just manage an office. Let's just make it a little real estate company. There are 4 people in the office, and you're growing leaps and bounds. People are completely overworked. You need to hire 2 people. If you went to hire 2 people, you're not likely to just say, okay, who had the higher GPA in college, let's hire that person. Or even who has the most years experience. This person has 16, this person has 8. 16 is better than 8. Let's go with 16 over 8. That's not how you're likely to think.
Right.
You're likely to look at like, okay, what are our needs? That would be your institutional priorities, right? What are our needs in the office from a standpoint of skills? That's like that. Then you would look at more, the voice piece would be like, what personal qualities do these individuals have? And how will they fit with the rest of the team? Like all those kinds of things are going to be huge in your decision. And some of those personal qualities can be things, like lots of things, right? It can be teachability, it can be work ethic, it can be integrity, trustability. But all of those things are going to be just colossal in your decision-making factoring, as opposed to just saying, okay, this one has a master's, this one only has a bachelor's. Well, if a bachelor's is good enough to do the work, that's fine. Or all the different things that might fall into that sort of data category. They usually are going to get trumped by the stuff in the voice category. Right. Because of the needs of the institution. Yeah, basically because of the needs of the institution. So, Lisa, a lot of times when we talk about voice, I think it conjures up different things in different people's minds on a lot of different topics. But one way of combining this voice with this institutional priorities is to look at what are the institution's needs. And oftentimes what happens in society trickles into this everything, right? What happens in society happens in the neighborhood, happens in the doctor's office, happens in the schools. And so right now, as a country, we're so divided, and politically and in other ways, socioeconomically, other ways. And so people are used to sort of being with their own tribe in their own little media world and in their own neighborhoods. And colleges are concerned about that because they're trying to, for the first time, sort of bring people together, living residentially that are very different. And they don't want World War III to break out on their campus.
Right.
So if you can actually look at the college-specific questions and you can see the institutional needs. And I want to do actually a series with you where we look at some of these very common college-specific questions and sort of give our listeners some guidance on how to answer them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that'll be helpful. But for now, what I'll say is there's so many questions that speak to needs a school has. Like I know you do this because you're working with a lot of students as well, but you'll see questions that talk about like, what's a time when you had your viewpoint changed by a conversation? That's one of those questions that's out there this year. And clearly they're looking for people that like are open-minded and not just so intractable, because that's what's happening in society. And then that's what's dividing their campus, right? Questions that deal with like times when you interacted with people who were different than you, right, and getting at that ability to sort of function in unity. And so any of those things like that become needs of the institution, and then they'll look for these personal qualities through the voice piece to see if they see those traits. Other things could be in just integrity. If there's been a lot of issues, let's say there's been a lot of cheating going on, and they see a high level of integrity. And so clearly one place they'll look for that are on these essays, personal statement, qualities emerge out of that. Cause-specific questions, clearly personal qualities emerge out of that, and an impression of a kid. And then one of the huge ones is just the recommendations. Like people don't realize, if you're a recommendation writer, please put some effort into learning how to really write good rec letters, because you'll be doing a real service for your students. And this is a place where sometimes better resource schools know how to position better and know how to write in a way that makes a kid pop. Because that's where you're a huge place where you're looking for that voice. And as an admission officer, that's one of the big places where you fall in love with the kid, is through what the teachers say about the outside readers. So that's a really important component of voice. Now, there's another reason why there's this perception that why did they take this kid ranked 26 over this kid ranked 8? That's not right. That's not fair. And it's because we are America. We're the land of the rugged individual. And we think of fairness in a context of individualism. And if I meet this standard, then I deserve to be admitted. And you really would be well-served, listeners, to think how an admission office thinks, which is, this is not an individual sport, it's a team sport. And I've shared this before, but we get new listeners all the time, and not everybody hears everything, and I think the last time was about a year and a half ago. My two favorite examples for this are the orchestra and the football team.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I did a little research because I'm not the most orchestra knowledgeable person over here, Lisa. I think you're more attuned to that than me. I'd rather go to a football game or maybe a history museum, but I think you go to the orchestra. So I had to look this up. And according to my research, some of the instruments that are not that hard to find are the flute, the clarinet, the trumpet, and the trombone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could be an unbelievable flutist, or I'm not going to try to say clarinetist because I'll probably flautist. I even messed up on that. Flautist. See, I need to stay in my lane. You know, what do you call a trumpet? Trumpeter? I don't even know. So anyway,
trumpeter, I think. I don't know.
think
well,
so.
we're going to
Anyway.
get all kinds of emails on this one.
I better get out of this lane fast. You're in the wrong lane of the highway. Shift gears. So, but then I did some research to find out what are the hardest instruments. Bassoon.
Yeah.
Bassoon is incredibly hard. Oboe, incredibly hard. And actually, I found out that it's incredibly expensive to get lessons in those two instruments, and to do it at such a young age that you're going to be talented enough for it to be a hook. And then harp and French horn are in demand too. Those are, and double bass. I found out French horn, harp, double bass, oboe, and flute, and bassoon. Now we got all of our parents who are listeners of like 4-year-olds signing little Johnny and Jane up. But so here's the point. If I'm an orchestra conductor and I'm trying to make the absolute best music, you might be like ranked 5th in the entire state in the flute or the clarinet. But if I already have a lot of talent there, then I don't really need your talent because I'm trying to make the best music. And same for football. That one I can talk about.
Oh boy. No, I'm in trouble.
So yeah, quarterback's great, but we have 4 really good ones. Guess what? We need some offensive tackles and guards and a center and a kicker and a wide receiver and defensive backs and defensive tackles. So if your skill set doesn't line up with our needs, this is one of the biggest reasons why you see schools go for kids that might even be significantly academically just going by pure metrics of AP exams and AP scores and SAT and ACT and GPA, not even close sometimes, is because of it's actually a team sport. It's not an individual sport. And people think it's an individual sport. They think of it almost like track and running. I'm a better runner. I'm faster than that person. So why would you go for the slower kid over the faster kid? Because it's not an individual sport. It's more like the orchestra of the football. Anything you want to say? I've just been rambling here.
Yeah, no, I just think that, we can't always predict from a applicant side what the needs of the institution is. And so it's not fair. I mean, and we just can't predict it. And so I think we just have to accept that it might not look fair on the outside, and maybe in a group sense or a larger sense of society that it is more fair, but we'll probably never know.
Yeah, and the purpose for this is, I believe, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. And I don't want people to be surprised. If you have a kid and they're ranked 3rd in the class and the school comes in and they grab the 23rd kid and they get in and your kid's 3rd, or I don't have to make kids at the top of the class. It could be a class of 500 and your kid is ranked 250 and they take the kid that's ranked 400 over the 250. If we've done a good job here, that should no longer be surprising to you.
Right.
That's the goal, is to explain to you why this happens so that it's not the type of disillusioning experience that I normally see it is for kids when that happens, and that's kind of the goal. Friends, this concludes the first part. I hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
it is final part of my interview with Jon Boeckenstedt, the Vice Provost of Enrollment at Oregon State University. We'll just be covering a wide range of different topics in this final interview. We'll be seeking his advice, and of course, I'll put him on the hot seat. I want to ask you one last question back to the first topic that we had that I never thought of.
Okay.
And I'd love to get your opinion because it's been a source of some intense debate amongst our co-hosts on this topic. So you might have followed it. You know, there's some controversy with Andy Strickler at Connecticut College. Did you see that? It kind of blew the internet up when a student applied to Connecticut College and was told that we can admit you if you flip from test optional from a test submitting to test optional.
Yeah.
And the point Connecticut College made was, we're very clear on our website. If you're under 1390, we don't recommend submitting. This was a student that didn't have the 1390. And so that would be factored in and it wouldn't be to their favor. So we saw that as being student-centered to help the student, where other people saw it as just manipulating your numbers to have higher test scores and sort of egregious marketing. And so how would you score that out in terms of, like, you're helping a student, but you're also not being negligent about that other master that you're serving? And so from Connecticut College standpoint, that they thought that they did that pretty well. You know, it's sort of striking the balance. You helped us. You did the student-centric thing, but it really created quite an up. I mean, Twitter blew up over this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would argue that it's student-centric. I don't agree that it's student-centric, and it's probably one of the few things I'll say is 100% bad on our scale. It's the same student, right? And if you're in an admissions office and you're making a decision about whether or not A, that student is capable of doing the work, and B, that student is likely to thrive in your community, it's the same student with the test scores or without the test scores, especially since you know the test scores already, right? It made absolutely no sense. I was vocally and publicly critical of him.
I remember you were. I actually engaged with you on Twitter on that. You did jump in on that. I just remembered.
Yeah. There are, I guess, absurd things you hear and see and talk about in college admissions. I would say that is among the most absurd things I've ever seen in my life. 100% bad from my perspective.
See, I think it's what I think is worse is their schools. So here's the problem people have in this test optional world now. They don't know whether to submit or not submit, right? Should I submit or should I not submit?
Right.
I think it's good when schools are clear with a student whether it's going to help or hurt you. What would be your thoughts on that? You know,
I agree, except that answer saying, 80% of the time, here's the situation, doesn't make students or parents happy, right? Yeah. They want certainty. Yeah. And the only way you can have certainty is if you go test blind. And I was we started moving to test optional before anyone had ever heard of COVID. And we got it approved in February or March of 2020. So it looked like it was COVID related, but it wasn't. Our faculty senate passed it by a vote of 70-1 in favor. And then someone made an amendment to allow us to go test blind in a couple of years if it worked out for us. And that passed, I think, 68-3. So, for your listeners who've never been to Oregon, it's a very chill place. People aren't so uptight about the prestige and the trappings of selectivity that everybody else seems to be fascinated with. I mean, when I go to DC, I can cut the college admissions tension with a knife. All right,
it's bad from DC to Boston. It's DC is bad.
Yeah,
New Jersey's really bad.
Yeah.
New York is terrible. Suburban Boston is as bad as anywhere. The Midwest, the Midwest is pretty chill, I find, other than certain parts of the North Shore, which you know all too well.
Exactly, right. But the West Coast, you can apply to any public university on the West Coast, Hawaii, Arizona, without test scores
Yes.
permanently.
Yeah.
Right? It
Yeah.
wasn't a COVID thing. It's now permanent at all those institutions. We just don't care about that sort of stuff. And it's not that they're not helpful, because it's not that they're worthless, because they're not worthless. It's just that the amount of money and time and effort and opportunity costs, the time spending prepping for tests as opposed to actually learning something in a real school setting, isn't worth the value that they provide.
What are some of your concerns moving forward, looking at higher ed and looking at admission practices? What are the things that trouble you?
When I was 30 and I'd go to a party with someone and they'd ask me what I do for a living and I'd say admissions, I'd say, oh, that's nice, that's interesting. Now it's like, what's the secret? What do my kids do? Admissions has become a thing unto itself,
Right.
instead of a part of the university. And I think we as a society need to think about how we change that, because admissions serves the academy. It shouldn't be a thing unto itself, unfortunately. So, I'd say that's one of the big problems with admissions is admissions itself and the fascination that we've developed with it. I think I'm very worried about having ACT and the College Board as brokers of opportunity via Student Search Service and EOS, and the search lists the college buy. I think there are better, cheaper, and more equitable ways for colleges to begin the recruiting process. I'd like to think about that. I'm stressed by the lack of a cogent, centralized information / clearinghouse system for American colleges and universities. I've written for a long time about that. I wrote an article in about 2013, I think, for the Washington Post about what if Google was responsible for the college admissions process. And much of that was picked up by the Coalition for College as they designed their maybe ill-fated application for admission. So I think there's a lot that we could fix if we stopped thinking so much about privilege and opportunity and more about access and equity and equality for students.
Well, Angel Perez has come out with, a whole new emphasis on access and schools being judged by whether they're providing access as opposed to selectivity. Right. Is how optimistic are you that there can be a paradigm shift with the population? It's very. I find it very, as a counselor, I find it very, very difficult to push back on this fixation with prestige. It is just so deeply, deeply ingrained. And for some people, for other people, if you can show them outcomes data of results, they're perfectly fine with that. Yeah. And that's one of my favorite questions on my questionnaire is, how do you feel about a school that nobody's going to be wowed by a t-shirt or a bumper sticker, but grad schools and employers are going to know it's a great school. And it's such a, and sometimes people will say, I'm not down with that. And other people will be, that's perfectly fine. And to me, that's a way of sort of sussing out quality education, results, outcomes versus I need to impress my peers.
Yeah. I think things will change when power and wealth aren't equated with each other. And I have to be honest and say I'm not optimistic that that's going to happen anytime in my lifetime. I wish it could. I'm thinking of the Tracy Chapman song, Poor People Gonna Rise Up and Take What's Theirs. If that ever happens, we might change some things in this country. But the more I see, and it's not so much just the current situation, it's my perspective, being 63, going on 64, and looking how things have changed and how it's actually in many ways gotten worse for low-income students, despite LBJ and, the Great Society stuff. We just haven't made those efforts work. And I think it's probably because people with wealth and power will do anything to hang on to it. And in order to hang on to it, you need wealth and power. So it's a bad cycle, I think. But
I mean, I'm sure an example for that is how the Pell Grant hasn't kept up in anywhere, shape, or form with the cost of higher ed, right? You go and look back in the early 70s when it was launched, and it was supposed to cover the majority of cost of attendance.
It used to be about 80% of the average 4-year public institution. And now it's, I don't know. It's a lot less, I would say.
I've seen stats in the 20s, it's in the high
probably.
20s. Yeah. Well, Jon, you've been most generous with your time. We have a tradition here. No first-time guest gets away without going on the hot seat. We call it the lightning round. But before we get to that, is there anything on any topic that you haven't shared that you'd like to share?
Mark, I have to tell you, this has been a really enjoyable hour and a half that we've spent together. Time has really flown by, and I'm grateful for you asking me to be on. It's really nice to be able to share my opinions with someone who's interested in them and who knows as much about this as I do. It's a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
Well, I wouldn't say I know as much as you do, but I'm most appreciative of your work. And I think a lot of our listeners know your name because I don't see it as much as I used to, but used to write a fair number of articles I used to see that used to pop around Huffington Post, Washington. And so, we one of the things we do is we talk about articles. And so we've taken some of your articles in the past. This is back when, particularly when you were at DePaul, and we've discussed them with our listeners. We've always gotten a great response. And so I like to see someone out here who's doing new things, who's challenging inequities, who's not afraid to take some bold stances. And I think, there's the work you've done with the Facebook group, which I don't know if you're involved in launching that. You certainly were a main leader. Our listeners know there's a forum where admission officers and college counselors come together and discuss cutting edge issues. That's 15,000 plus strong. And I know you've pulled back a little from it, but you had a major leadership role in that forum.
Yeah. So in the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, Bob Turba and I started a group on Ning, which was an early platform where we tried to get people talking about real college issues, not how to hang pennants or not, things like that, but real issues of access and attainment and whatnot. And it just never took off. And then several years later, I'm guessing 2012 or so, he started a Facebook group for that exact same thing. And he thought there would be 100 people that might want to join it at some point. And when it got to 400 or something, I jumped in and said, Bob, would you like a co-moderator here? I'd be happy to help on this because Bob was at or near retirement and wanted to spend more time on the golf course anyway.
Sure.
So it grew, and I don't know how many it is now. I've left Facebook because I have some concerns with the platform itself.
Yeah.
But other people have taken it over, and it seems to be running strong and going strong. So I wish them nothing but the best.
Awesome.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
So Vince has given us our recommended resource for the day. I'm very excited about it. We talked about it before. Share what's on your mind, Vince.
So 2 weeks ago, there's a lot of conferences right now. NACAC, College Board's coming up, regional conferences, and they had the University of California conference. And on one of the slides, it's accessible to everyone. They showed counselors that you could, if you're a student in California, you could look up your high school and see how many students applied, and it looked like the last 10 years. What was how many people were admitted and how many people committed. You could also look up and see what the admitted GPA was. And so for a student who was trying to assess whether or not they were a good candidate, this would be a great tool. But let me caution everyone. When you look at that GPA, remember your GPA, UC GPA is only 10th and 11th grade classes. So they're not taking into account 9th grade, but they don't ignore 9th grade, but 10th and 11th is how you calculate your UC GPA. So when Mark shares this resource, there'll be a link, and there'll also be, I'll also share a link about how to calculate your UC GPA. So you can do that. Look at your school. I used it twice. recently with families. For one senior, it stopped the conversation. They realized that it was not a good match for them, that it wasn't a wild card, it was a fantasy, I think.
I call those lottery schools.
Lottery, there you go.
Chance of winning the lottery, getting in there.
Yes, it was a lottery school. And then for the other family, it was great because it was still early enough that they could have an impact, but the student realized that they needed to put their foot on the gas.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you sharing that, because not all families, but most families don't realize how much competition's out there, and they tend to come to us with top-heavy lists.
Yes.
And the data doesn't lie. Like, it's good to get a dose of reality because you're going to get it anyway. And so, and if you choose to apply, at least, but I say to people when they choose to apply to a lottery, or even people call a far reach or an unlikely, which for me is less than 1 in 7 chance. I'm just like, if you want to apply, all I say is guard your heart, because
Yes.
not getting in stings, but it does sting less if you've kind of somewhat mentally prepared for that.
Well said. That's smart. Yeah, protect your heart. That's good. I would have used that one today.
All right, lightning round. You can't be in education. You have to have another profession. What would it be?
I think I would be one of two things, either a pilot or a cabinet maker.
Nice. What's the history there?
Well, I've always been fascinated by airplanes. Ever since I was a little kid, when an airplane flew over, I would stop and look up at it. And the idea of flight just really, really propels me. No pun intended. And cabinet makers, I love doing things with my hand and making things of beauty. And so I'm not very good at it, but I would probably be an average cabinet maker, I guess.
Hey, it's all good. All right, twofold question. You can have lunch with anybody alive, first question, or deceased, second question. Who would you pick?
Any person alive, I would say probably Hillary Clinton. Any person deceased, I would go back to my great-great-grandfather and ask him about their reasons for coming to the United States from Germany.
Nice. So let's follow up on the Hillary. What would be 2 or 3 questions you'd want to ask Hillary?
Well, I'd want to talk to her about what she would see as the path out of this mess that we find ourselves in. You know, I think a lot about a house divided against itself cannot stand, and I'm really worried about a lot of things in the country and how we've been sort of taken over by a minority rule, and a small percentage of the people are dictating policies and procedures, and the experiment with the great democracy doesn't seem to be working real well right now. I'd want to talk to her about politics, and I'd want to talk to her about the 2016 campaign.
Yeah, fascinating. Speaking about things not working, literally before this interview, I was just chilling, relaxing, and I started to watch this CNN documentary. They do these special 1 hour things, and it's on Steve Bannon, and it's called "Divided We Fall." Yeah. And I got 2 to 3 minutes in, and I said, this is too depressing, because it was basically how we could create a whole system where we'll never lose again. It's what's going on in the state houses, take them over, be anti-democratic and control them, use force if we have to. And I'm like, goodness gracious, we're on the cusp of losing our democracy.
Yeah, and interesting. I mean, we're veering off topic a little bit, I guess. But if you go back to the Reagan campaign in the 80s with Lee Atwood and the Southern Strategy, and the interview he gave, which I'm surprised he gave, but really laid it all out there about how you sort of bring especially Southern racists who are Democrats into the Republican fold by using these code words and doing things that you shouldn't do, coupled with the economic philosophy, which started the great division of wealth distribution in the country. I think that's when we all sort of started turning bad here. That's my personal opinion. Don't email me if you disagree, because I hear it from my brother all the time, and I'm not going to change my mind.
Well, I hear it too. So switching back to lighthearted stuff, what sport do you enjoy the most to watch?
Oh, baseball by a mile. I love baseball. Yeah. And I'll watch other sports, but nothing captivates my interest or gets my attention like baseball.
Cubs, White Sox, who's your team?
Cubs, always been a Cubs fan, even though the National League has sold out and went with the designated hitter. That broke my heart, but I
that was a
still
while ago.
isn't it this year that the
Oh,
National
you
League?
mean recently? Oh, recently
Yeah.
they made the. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah. Broke my heart.
Yeah. What would be another place you'd be interested in living if you had to move from Oregon, and it can be in the U.S. or anywhere in the world?
I would probably live somewhere near one of the poles because I like cold weather. And I
Really?
actually I do. I love cold weather, and
Wow.
I'm much happier. I kind of have reverse seasonal affective disorder. I'm much happier when it gets dark about dinner time and stays dark until after you wake up.
That is
Long
hilarious.
days kill me.
All right, I'm going to go lighthearted on this. What is a pet peeve that you have?
So you're driving down the road on an empty highway, and there's a car that comes to a T intersection ahead, and there's no one behind you and no one from the other way, and they pull out ahead of you and drive slowly. They could have waited 2 seconds for me to pass, and they could have taken all the time they wanted, but they didn't see it. So really, it's people who don't understand the system and the environment in which they're operating, and that could be a lot of things. That could be people at lines at the grocery store or anything. It's really, I like to take sort of a systematic approach to things. And if people don't see that, I don't understand how they can be blind to it.
All right. A book or two that you would recommend for somebody to read to get a better understanding of college admissions?
Oh, of college admissions.
And then I'm just going to ask you for a book that's impacted your life in general.
Yeah.
In any way,
So B. Dalton Thrasher wrote a book in the 60s. I think he was at MIT about college admissions, and someone, I think College Board, has made it public on one of their websites. I think it's still the best explanation of how college admissions works or could work. And it's a nice sort of intellectual exercise about how, in fact, we might return to those days at some point, I would say. And then another one would be The Winner Take All Society. I think it speaks not directly, but indirectly to what we see happening in college admissions today.
Nice. Maybe not nice, but nice book I have not read that. I've recently become a big Audible fan. And so I'll check it out on Audible. I got 4 credits there waiting on me to just pick 4 more books. And
very good.
Just the name is already coupled with your recommendation. I want to read that. My last question for you, Jon, is your best advice for 3 groups: students, parents, and college counselors.
For students, I'll share a piece of advice I got when our kids were going through the college admissions process, and that is talk about college once a week. We made it Sunday at dinner when everybody was gathered around. That would be the only time we would bring up college with our kids. If they wanted to come to us anytime during the week, we were, of course, there, but we would never start that discussion except for Sunday nights. And so we put boundaries on it, and it worked out really well for us. For students, I would say don't let someone else define you. Be true to your own calling, your own heart, your own vision, and your own compass. And if something doesn't feel right for you, don't go along with the masses, and don't buy conventional wisdom. Think for yourself. And for for college counselors, I would say read higher ed data stories.
You know what? For other people, I can say that was self-serving, but knowing how good higher ed data stories is and how unique it is as a resource, I think that's perfectly fair, and I don't think that's self-serving at all. So
Thanks.
let's close with that. Jon, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you giving us 90 minutes of your time. And I'll tell you what, I'll forward the responses to you we get from our listeners, because they let us know what they think. And unless somebody talks about your politics, then we'll leave that one out.
Yeah, that's all right. Thanks, Mark. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Keep up the good work.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'll have announcements, of course, and then we will continue with the final part of Lisa's interview with Nick Gozick, who, if you heard the first part, you know is an expert on study abroad. And so in part 2, Nick will tell us how to evaluate a study abroad program. He'll talk about his 52-point plan at Elon for study abroad. He'll talk about the relationship between research and study abroad. He'll tell us about the Georgetown Consortium project. And then Lisa asks Nick some questions about Elon. What are the distinctives about Elon? Why'd you come to Elon? There's some great insights he shares there. And then Nick gives his best advice for students, and he goes on the hot seat. We hope you join us on Monday. And friends, remember, college is not a prize to be won, but a match to be made. College is not a prize to be won. It is a match to be made. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to compare the college selection process to buying a pair of shoes. You walk into a shoe store. You don't necessarily walk into a shoe store and just say, I'm buying the most expensive pair of shoes in the store. 1, it may not be in your budget. But 2, it may not fit your foot right. We've all had the experience of putting on a pair of shoes and, ow, that hurts my foot, it hurts my toe. Or, gee, that's way too loose, it's way too big. Or, gee, I'm walking around, it's not comfortable. Then we try on that pair and we just glide. And that's what we mean. When you find that right fit, that right match for you, that's what you're looking for. All right, see you on Monday, everybody. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Glass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.